Hello from Beit from Jerusalem. Almost happy Purim. Last lecture, we spoke about Shahin, the Jewish Iranian poet of the 14th century. Shahin, in one of his books, wrote about the Esther Megillah, Esther's scroll. As we spoke last time, he wrote it in Judeo-Persian, Persian written in Hebrew script. Here you could see a picture from his book Ardeshir Nameh, which is Esther's scroll. And you could see that it's written in Hebrew, but it's actually Persian. And this book composed of 10,000 couplets of poems, of epic poems that actually depicts the story of Esther and Mordechai. If you could read here, for example, you could see that it says Raftane Shah Behaman, meaning in English, the Shah went to Haman. So you could read it, but you not actually can understand it. But what is interesting enough that in Shahin's book, Ardeshir Nameh, but also in his other books, he's taking different sources, different interpretations from the local Jewish legends, midrashim, and he actually woves it in the biblical story of the Megillah. So in that way, we can actually learn about which books were, or which legends were available at this period of time in this surrounding of Iran. So we have some kind of a glimpse to the bookshelf of Iranian Jewish community in the 14th, 13th century. And again, as I said, Shahin is influenced by Persian poetic books of his time. The main one is actually the Shahnameh. And like Ferdowsi, he's also using interpretation from these local legends in area and actually uses them in order to make his story more lavish, more interesting. And so Shahin actually gives us another narrative of Esther's scroll, which is not, unfortunately, well known in the Jewish history. And lately it was translated into English and also into Hebrew. So Shahin is one example that shows us that Jews actually flourished under the Mongol rule. And now we'll continue to another main dynasty in Iranian history, the Safavids. The Safavids of the 16th century. The arrival of the Safavids to Iran in 1501 in the early 16th century marks a turning point in the history of Iran in general and in the history of its religious minorities in particular. Under the Safavid, Shiism became the state religion, which is a big change for Iran, but also for Jewish Iranian community. In the like manner of Sunni Islam, Shiism viewed the people of the book living under Islam as zimmis, protected minorities, as we discussed in our last lecture. Nevertheless, Shiism has some unique characteristics in this regard. A symbol of Shia treatment of religious minority is the concept of nejasat, or impurity. And you will probably know this word of nejasat or najes also in Hebrew, which is nijas. So najes, nijas, the meaning of nijas in Hebrew derives from the word najes in Persian. What does it mean? According to this concept, religious minorities, among whom the Jews were perceived as impure, whose touch defiles the Shia believer. So you didn't want that a religious minority will touch you. Exactly like you don't want that a nijis will annoy you. So this concept of impurity had a tremendous impact on the Jews' lives and daily interaction with larger Shia society. It helped segregating the Jews and was used as a pretext for barring them entrance into their local marketplaces, the bazaars of certain cities. This concept of impurity had a tremendous impact on the Jews' lives and daily interaction with larger Iranian society and the destiny of Iranian Jewish society changed tremendously after the 16th century. In the reality of the Safavid era, the Jews seem to have suffered greatly. This mistreatment of the Jews during those days explained as rooted in Shia tradition. However, there were other factors who played a role. Evidence shows us that some economic as well as community-related reasons were occasionally behind the suppression of the Jews. So it wasn't only the religious reason. There were other reasons, economically, culturally, that influenced Jewish society. And archival materials suggest that some of the Jews were active and influential in the national commerce of silk and other important commodities of the time. As you know, the Silk Road actually went in the northern part of Iran. These Jewish merchants were competing with their Muslim and Armenian colleagues that lived in Iran, and probably this led to the tensions between the Jews and other minorities and the Muslim surrounding, and not only the religious explanation. Moreover, in the 17th century, Judeo-Persian Kitab-e-Anusi, the Book of First Conversions, our main source for Jewish life in Safavid Iran, elaborates on the persecutions of Jewish community under the Safavid. It shows vividly how some major attacks against the Jews were originated by internal rifts within the Jewish community, which only later drew to the attention and rage of larger society. Kitab-e-Anusi also demonstrates how in times of pressure, Jews turned to Shia religious scholars for assistance, which these scholars usually granted. They actually went to the ulama, the religious scholars, in order to get help for them. Sometimes they got help against other Jewish members in their community. Kitab-e-Anusi also demonstrates how in times of pressure, Jews turned to Shia religious scholars, as I said, and also to the rulers, the kings. Shias also attacked other non-Muslim minorities. This is also should be mentioned, and not only Jews. So tensions weren't just between Shiites and Jewish communities. It was in different cities, in different communities, and it also depended on the governors and the religious scholars' treatment toward Jews and other minorities. Another interesting perspective about the relationship between these communities can be learned from a fragment of a synagogue wall from Esfahan from the 60th century, as you could see here. This wall section contains 3 decorated openings where the Torah books were placed. This outstanding tile mosaic structure would have demonstrated a wall within 3 such niches corresponding to 3 different scrolls that might be used for reading Torah portions on certain holidays. The use of the wall niches for Torah scroll was a feature of some of the earliest synagogues and continues today in Mizrahi Sephardi communities. And why it is important? Why it gives us another glimpse on the Jewish community under the Safavids? As you could see, the wall is decorated with ceramic tiles, known from the local architecture and bearing arabesque patterns. As you could see, rich vegetative shapes from complex patterns in the background, consisted with the light blue borders. In the upper part, as you could see, of the wall, there are engraved verses from Psalms. So this wall is actually a feature of the Safavid architecture that used ceramic. The Safavid use of ceramic came from the cities of Kerman and Mashhad, where they produced in the 7th century and even before ceramic vessels coated with a turquoise or green glaze, as you could see even in this wall. So the Jews of Esfahan actually adopted the same art that Safavid used to build their palaces, their mosques. So it is clear that they actually adopted Iranian culture and they integrated in the general architectures of that time. It believed that this wall has been a part of a large synagogue in Esfahan, the capital of the Safavid back then. In Esfahan at that time was the large Jewish community. And we could learn from this wall the prominence of this Jewish community. And only a prosperous and a strong community that lives in a kind of a peaceful relationship, which is Muslim surrounded, and had financial resources, could build such a magnificent synagogue, as we can learn from the remnant of the wall in this photo. So it seems that even thus there were some tensions between Jewish community and Muslim surrounding and other minorities. The community of Esfahan and in other cities enjoyed relatively peace and royal protection at certain times. However, in other times, as is depicted in Kitab Anusi, they were treated differently. Some of them actually had to convert for a period of time into Islam until they were pardoned by the rulers or the Muslim Shiite ulama. We learn from Kitab Anusi that they sometimes were labeled by using patches or different hats that differentiate them from the Muslim surrounding. So as you could learn, the past of Jews in Iran was actually is complicated, And we cannot say that there was mistreatment of the Jewish community all the time, in all the cities. It changed from time to time regarding different circumstances. Now I want to move to the Qajar dynasty. The Qajar dynasty ruled Iran at the end of the 18th century. The Qajar dynasty ruled more or less Iran as we know it today. More or less the same territory as in the Safavid Iran, or as you could see in this map of Iran today. The Qajars were a new dynasty that came from the southern part, the northwestern parts of Iran. They took over Iran and controlled it for over 100 years. During the Qajars, the socioeconomic and legal status of the Jews of Iran changed extremely. In a way, the Qajars continued the legacy of the Safavid times and the treatment towards Jews during that time. But under the Qajari rules, the treatment toward Jews was harsher. Under the Qajars' rules, we don't know much about the size of the Jewish population, unfortunately. A raw estimate of Jews' number at the end of the 19th century and early 20th century can be reached. From different sources, we can conclude that there were at least 40,000 Jews out of a population of about 10 million. So Jews represented at least 0.4% of the larger society. And you should remember that there were some other minorities in Iran back then. Armenians, Christians, Zoroastrians, and a new religion, the Baha'is. Although Jews lived, as you could see from the map, throughout Iran, by the late 19th century, it seems that they lived mostly in the central and western regions of the country. Over here. You also remember that these parts of Iran are mainly desert. So the majority of the Jewish community appear to have been urban-based, even if many Jews frequently traveled or lived in rural areas and in villages all over Iran. The biggest communities were those of Shiraz, over here, and its surrounding, Esfahan, what used to be the capital of the Safavids, Hamedan, okay, that as I said, the tombs of Esther and Mordechai is there, and Tehran, which is the new capital and a new city under Qajars, Kermanshah, Yazd, Urumiyeh, Kerman, and Sanandaj, some other big cities in Iran. So Jews were actually spread, as we said, mostly in the western and central parts, but all over these areas. Like most minority groups, Jews experienced hardship and persecutions, especially because of their religious beliefs, and these beliefs segregated them from the mainstream, mainly Muslim Iranians. However, as I said, it seems that under the Qajar, mainly early Qajars, Jews suffered from occasional persecutions and regular abuse, and they were at the bottom of the social ladder. So the treatment towards them was even worse than that of Christians, for example. Under the Qajars, certain Shi'i laws were applied. This was the case not only with the aforementioned concept of nejasat, impurity, but also with a certain inheritance law, by which an infidel, kafir, cannot inherit from a Muslim, but a Muslim can inherit from an infidel. According to this law, if a Muslim or an infidel are considered heirs of a person, the Muslim will inherit the entire estate. So Jews complained time and again against this law that promoted conversions to Islam, because Jews didn't want to let go of these assets. So what happened that they either converted to Islam or actually lost all their possessions. This law actually tore the Jewish community and Jewish families apart. We have evidence from the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century showing that when it snowed or rained during the winter, the Jews could not leave their houses because of their impurity. The Muslims were afraid that the rain or the snow will transfer their impurity to others, because water transfers impurity, according to Shiite law, Shiite Sharia. Jews were not allowed to use the public water sources and the public bath. And we know from different stories that even though Jews went outside and they wanted to drink from taps, for public taps in the bazaar, for example, they couldn't do it. And if they touched it, sometimes the Muslims actually started to shout at them or even hit them because they did something that is wrong according to Muslim perception, and they defiled the Muslims. So Jews were segregated, and for example, they even could not sell meat, butchered meat, to Muslims, because according to the Shiite law, the butchered meat, the Jewish butcher meat, is not allowed. They couldn't touch goods in the market. If they touched fruit with their hands, they were required to pay for it because they defiled the fruit with their touch. And we know that there is a phrase in Persian called Miveya Judi, meaning Jewish fruits. These fruits are the worst fruits in the bazaar that were sold to Jews, because the Jews couldn't pick their own fruits. So usually what happened is that the seller gave them the bad fruits. Jews could not speak loudly in public. Jews, and not only that, Jews were mocked in public in various ways and abused. So the legal restrictions endorsed against Jews in Iran under the laws of Shiism helped to segregate them and push the Jews to the fringe of society. Until the Pahlavi area, the beginning of the 20th century, the Jews of Iran were forced to live in separated neighborhoods that were called Mahalle, as you could see here, or Mahallei Yahud, the Jewish quarter. However, it should be mentioned that Jews also choose to live in separate streets, neighborhoods, or quarters in Jewish environment, separated from their Muslim surrounding. Also because it made it easier for them to maintain their Jewish life. However, they didn't have the choice to leave the neighbor if they wanted to. There were different reasons for the existence of Jews, of a Jewish area in Iran. As mentioned, the Jews themselves preferred to live in their own demarked zones in which they could have their own they would have their Jewish life. These areas include central Jewish institutions such as synagogues, as well as public and ritual baths. Living with other Jews at the same place also guarantee them some kind of protection. It was easier for them to preserve identity in a Jewish community. And also, in times of anti-Jewish persecutions, it would be easier for them to protect themselves. As for greater society, existence of Jews in one local would allow for more efficient government rule over a specific group, thereby, for instance, expediting the collection of taxes, the jizya tax that every Jew had to pay to the Muslims. Muslim society sought to distinguish itself from non-Muslims so as to secure its own identity and differences. And in Shia Iran, the alleged impurity of these Jews was another motivation, as I said, for their segregation to one area. The Jewish neighborhood, the Jewish quarter, as you could see in these pictures, in most cities were located near the bazaar, the market square. This proximity was intended to protect Jewish merchants and vendors from mobs gathering around them so that they could find refuge in their homes in an event of attack. The Jewish neighborhood was crowded. Its alleys were narrow, as you could see from the left picture. It was dirty, and the houses were made of clay or mud. The height of the houses was low, so that the Muslim mob could not easily break into the houses. It was easier to protect themselves this way. The Jewish neighborhood in Tehran, as you could see in this picture, was called Sarechal, on the top of the pit. And why is that? Why it was called like that? Because the Mahalle became the city's municipal dump, where a pit was located and all the municipal waste was dumped there. Think about the smell that these Jews had to smell all day long. So Jews were forced to distinguish themselves not only in their place of living, but also by wearing special clothing. Occasionally, they had to wear a distinguished sign notifying onlookers of their lesser status as Jews. At the end of the 19th century, the Jews of Tehran were first to wear some kind of a patch that is for a short period of time that actually distinguished them from the Muslims. Only with the help of the Western powers, this law was abolished. So the Shiite restriction had an especially negative influence on the vocational options available to Jews. Jews perform various jobs in the society. There were peddlers, wine sellers, because as you know, according to Islam, they couldn't drink wine or produce it, so Jews used to do it. Musicians, also because according to Islam, music is forbidden. Tailors, money changers, polishers of glass, blacksmith, pit cleaners, antique dealers, writers of talismans and fortune-telling, and craftsmen. Jews could not open stores in local marketplaces of certain cities, and thus many Jews were obligated to be peddlers and to travel from town to town in order to sell their own merchandise. And they had to bargain in order to get the most profit out of their goods, mainly because they were mistreated. The painting of Kamal al-Mulk, the father of the Iranian realist school of painting, is a valuable tool in understanding Iranian depiction of Jewish reality in the 19th century. In this painting, which portrays Jewish peddlers at work, we can learn a lot of the status of Jews during the Qajar times and according to their vocations. You can pay attention to the Jewish figures on the right-hand side of the painting. The Jews opposed to the Muslim look very poor. The Jews wear a white belt or even some kind of a rope which mark them out as Jews. While the Muslim at the left side of the pictures wears clean and fashionable lambskin hat. His clothing are new, respectable, while the Jews, not only that they don't have a lambskin hat, they have a simple clothes hat, some kind of a yarmulke. So note that the Jews are they're not wearing socks on their feet. They're wearing what is called in Persian giveh, shoes made of fabric, rather than shoes made of leather like the one that the Muslim wears. So we can learn from this painting and some other documents that up till the early 20th century, before the Pahlavi dynasties, the images of the Jews in Iran remained rooted in the realm of religious law and popular perceptions. By the way, one of the most important of these images of the Jews in Iran was the idea that Jews are greedy. These Iranian perceptions arose from Jewish reality, as was already mentioned, especially the idea that Jews are all unusually crafty in the economic sphere because they were peddlers. The Islamic law, the Sharia, like the Catholic Church, also prohibits charging interest as well as investing in businesses that provide goods or services considered contrary to its principles. So, since the Iranian Jews were the biggest and most geographically dispersed Dhimmi population in Iran, they created a large credit net and engaged in usury. Many Jews found themselves serving as money lenders in 19th century Iran, just like European Jews during the Middle Ages. So this was one of the prominent stereotypical representative of Jews in Iran. By the way, similarly to the Shiloh character from Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice. Yet, some Jews reportedly reached also under the Qajar to higher positions. A socially respected profession held by some Jews was medicine. Often local rabbis, Jewish doctors provided treatment to Jews and Muslims. Some Jews were court physicians, including Nehorai Nur Muhammad, for example. Some Jews owned small businesses or were dealers in old clothing. Others served as tailors, as I said, and some other low-income profession. Another interesting thing that even Jewish women were sometimes worked and they had some kind of interaction with their Muslim surrounding. Sometimes they work in the tobacco industry. They were midwives, for example. And so they had some interaction also with their Muslim Jews neighbors. The discriminatory laws reduced ties between Jews and Muslims and even damaged neighborly relation between the two peoples, even though, as I mentioned, sometimes they had these interactions, especially because of their vocations. The Qajar period, which ended in 1925, was characterized by the vulnerability of Jewish community and its relegation to the margins of society. Various accounts attest to Jewish suffered in the 19th century. This consisted of occasional persecutions and abuse at the hand of Jews' neighbors, in addition to blood libel accusations, as well as forced conversions to Islam, the most famous of which occurred in 1839, Mashhad. I will elaborate about it soon. The reasons for anti-Jewish assaults were socioeconomic and religious, as well as political. Similarly to past times, campaigns against the Jews were sometimes regarded as attacks against the government. Occasionally, Muslims would hurt Jews, since some Jews, apparently a minority of them, represented or were regarded as connected with foreign interests that started to invade to Iran in this era, like example, British, French powers. Other factors also influenced the condition of the Jews: epidemics, famine, political instability in certain places, and occasionally misgovernment. Jews were only one of the various groups that endured these factors, mainly because they didn't have any protection outside of Iran, in contrast to other religious minorities, mainly Christians, and they were isolated from other Jewish communities. Now I would like to elaborate about the Mashhadi Jews. At times, Jews were forcibly converted to Islam, as was the case with the conversion of the Jewish community of Mashhad in 1839. The Jews of Mashhad led crypto-Jewish life for generations to come afterwards. The Jewish community of Mashhad was founded in 1746 when Nader Shah Afshar, the Iranian Shah, called for relocation of 40 Jewish families from Razvin to Mashhad. These families settled in Mashhad and were selected to protect Nader Shah treasures and jewelries which he had acquired from his Indian invasion. Mashhad is located, as you could see in the map over here, relatively remote northeast of the country. It is one of the holiest cities in Iran and holy to the Shiite religion, because the 18th Shia Imam Ali Rida is buried there. So these Jews of Mashhad until the beginning of the 19th century, enjoyed high status, embraced trade on the Silk Road, and enjoyed connections with the British and Afghani and India. Apparently, jealousy over the wealth and status of Jews of Mashhad, as well as accusations that they were agents of the British, provoked a pogrom committed in 1839 by Muslims against the Mashhadi Jewish community in the city of Mashhad. This event is called Al-Adad, God's justice in Persian. It was characterized by the mass killing and forced conversion of the Jews to Islam. On March 1839, on the eve of Passover, a Muslim accused a Jewish member that he insulted Islam, and because of this event, a chaos started in Mashhad. Another narrative that was the pretext to this pogrom is that of a blood libel on the Muslim holiday of Ashura, one of the main holy important holidays of the Shiites. So according to a Muslim narrative, there was a blood libel during the Ashura march. Because of that, the mob attacked the Jewish community, burned down the synagogue, looted homes, abducted girls, and killed between 30 and 40 people. Within the next 24 hours, under the risk of death, approximately 300 Jewish families in Mashhad decided to convert to Islam under the advisement of their community leaders. And as I said, the term Al-Adad, God's justice, or a punishment from God, was coined by the first converted to relate their past sins with the misfortune they were enduring. Following this event, some Mashhadi Jews did not feel safe in Mashhad anymore and decided to move to other cities in the area, such as Bukhara and Samarkand. A large group moved to Herat in present-day Afghanistan, where the majority of the Muslims were Sunni and more tolerant of Jews than the Shiites. The remaining community members began to actively practice crypto-Judaism while superficially adhering to Islamic beliefs. They proceeded to live dual lives as converted Jews. During this time, they were called Jadidul Islam, a term meaning new Muslims. On the outside, they acted as Muslims. Their clothes, name, and lifestyles resembled those of their Iranian neighbors. At home, however, they secretly taught their children to read Hebrew, light candles, and observe Shabbat. They will open their shops on the Shabbat, but made excuses not to sell. They brought meat from Muslim butchers, but secretly throw them away. And they actually used Jewish butcher in order to provide kosher meat for them. Couples, as you could see in the picture, underwent two marriage ceremonies. One conducted by Muslim cleric and another in secret by a Jewish rabbi. You could see here the Jewish ketubah and the Muslim document. To maintain privacy for prayers and communal gatherings, they lived close to one another, often connecting their houses through underground basements. The secret way of life continued in the Mashadi community over a century, until more or less the 40s in the 20th century. This event of al-Adadi, this persecution in Mashhad, also might be understood in a larger Jewish-Iranian relations. Some Jews in Mashhad, as we understand, served as agents for the British government. This fact, in addition to the withdrawal of Iran from Herat in 1839 under diplomatic pressure from the British government, created an increasingly hostile atmosphere toward Jews in Mashhad. So it wasn't only for religious reasons that this massacre occurred in the Mashhadi community. As you could see, there were some other reasons, political reasons, that created tension between these two communities. Few years after the incidents, with the intervention of Moses Montefiore, the head of British Jewry at that time, Jews were allowed by Muhammad Shah's decree, the Iranian Shah, to return to Judaism. However, most Jews, fearing the anger of the local population, decided to continue to live as Muslims and live as a crypto-Jews. This secret way of life, as I said, continued for over a century. After World War II, the Jews of Mashhad began to leave the city, and by the 50s, few of them remained in Mashhad. Most of them relocated to Tehran, while others moved to cities all over Iran. Many of them also choose to leave Iran altogether, to Israel, to Britain, to United States, and even to the Far East. And to these days, they have a very unique Jewish Mashhadi identity that they preserve. The Al-Adad incident was a prominent event in the history of Jewish-Muslim relations because an entire community of Jews were first to convert, and it was one of the first times European Jews intervened on behalf of Iranian Jews. This is also the first blood label against Jewish community in the Middle East, even before the famous one in Damascus. To sum up, the Jewish community at the end of the 19th century in Iran was very weak and isolated relatively from other Jewish communities outside of Iran. They were marked contrast to the social economic status of Jews in other Muslim communities, where Jews were usually higher on the socioeconomic ladder. One of the main reasons for this difference in Muslim treatment of their Jewish religious minorities was the Shia sect of Islam and its harsher attitudes towards religious minorities. However, due to their weakness, the Jews also found themselves caught in internal conflicts between various powers elements within Iran, but also in the struggle between Iranian players and foreigners. This situation is going to change by the end of the 19th century, especially because of these power players that I mentioned. About that, we'll discuss in our next lecture. Thank you very much.